if you handle profanity well in your novel, it can actually help your book. But a lot of writers struggle with how to use it, when to use it, when to use substitutes. So we're gonna look at how 9 mega best-selling authors used profanity in their book in a way that helped out their characters and their story. And the first one we're gonna start with is one cursing technique that Stephen King swears by. So in Stephen King's book On Writing, he said that his mother was always very opposed to swearing. She said it was the language of the ignorant. And he says that he mostly agrees with her, but he also says that the key to good dialogue is honesty. And what that honesty means is sometimes characters do swear. But I'd like to point out a very interesting technique that King uses with swearing called inversion, which is where basically you have your heroic character curse semi-frequently, but then your evilest character doesn't use any foul language whatsoever. And for an example of this, look at Annie in Stephen King's book Misery. She is the type of person who will take her favorite writer, imprison them, and then break his feet if you watch the movie, or cut off his feet if you read the book. And yet, even though she's this horrific villain, she says that she hates profanity, and instead she uses these most innocent substitutions like cockadoodie brat and fiddly foof. So this innocent language contrasts so sharply with her horrifying personality. There's also a little bit of psychology here, like maybe she's trying to convince herself that she is a good person by not swearing. So to use this technique in your book, find the absolute worst character and have them not swear at all, and then find your best character and have him swear like a sailor. Now this next technique is super powerful. It is number 2, Interstellar's 1 F-bomb. Scarcity is golden, especially when it comes to profanity, because sometimes if you avoid dropping any sort of foul language for a long period of time, and then you use a curse word, that curse word lands with like a force of 1,000 tons. So in Interstellar, when Cooper is walked in with Dr. Mann, he learns of this horrible betrayal of the entire human race that might honestly destroy the human race. That Dr. Mann has only signaled the Endurance to come there because he wanted himself to be saved. And Cooper responds, "Hey, coward." Now, what does this teach us? I think it shows us that cursing can be really good for emphasis. If you have the most pivotal point in your novel, sometimes that's the right point to use a curse word because it tells the reader like, hey, look, like this is something that's worthy of cursing. I do think there is a danger if swearing is sort of omnipresent throughout your entire book, that it loses its power in a way and the reader becomes really desensitized to it. So I would try to find the most pivotal points in your plot and then just sprinkle in some profanity there to wake the reader up. Now the third technique that we're going to look at is probably the most fun out of everything we're talking about in this video. It's number 3, Maze Runner's substitutions. James Dashner is the author of Maze Runner, and he made a very curious choice because he was writing for a YA market. He chose not to employ traditional curse words, but instead he decided to substitute a whole bunch of slang words that he made up. For instance, the boys frequently curse using the word shuck. I'll give you 3 guesses what that is a substitute for. He also has this other one where the boys say clunk.
I clunked my pants 3 times.
Which is a substitute for, well, poop would be the G-rated version. So what does this strategy get you? Well, 1, it gets you realism without the vulgarity. 2, it's actually really good for world building. If you are creating a universe in a sci-fi land or fantasy land or something like that, it helps readers to feel like, oh, like there's even their own language here. And 3, I also think it's really fun to be original and to coin some words because it sets your book apart. It makes it feel different than all the other books. Now, you can also use this strategy if you're writing to a particular conservative audience or religious audience or simply young audience. And honestly, it's really fun to come up with substitutions for swear words as well. Just write down a list of common ones and then what your substitution is. And in my dialogue course, I have a whole video on swearing, but I also have 28 other videos walking you through the steps of how to become a better dialogue writer. I go over stuff like the 12 ways to make each character sound different in your book. I go over the 4 pillars of dialogue writing, which are evade, fight, conceal, and contrast. I also go over a lot of common mistakes that writers make when writing dialogue and give you lots of examples to show you, all right, here's what the most amazing dialogue can actually do. So if you've been a regular viewer of this channel and you're like, I want to take my writing to the next level, then I would recommend either buying that course or subscribing to BookFox Academy, which gives you access to all of my courses. Now it's time for point number 4, which is honestly one of the grittier points in this whole video. This is J.D. Salinger's $1 Million Raw Honesty. I know you guys know Salinger's Catcher in the Rye, and Holden Caulfield in that book does not hold back on the language. He is very unfiltered in the way he swears in that book. But it does give you a sense that this character is trying to be honest. They are not like holding back in any way. Maybe through cursing, he's trying not to be a phony. Little sidebar information here. This was actually the very first novel in the US that contained the words F you. Although no character said it, it was just on a wall like graffiti. There, now you feel a little smarter. My overall sense of the way that swearing works in this book is that it is the opposite of gratuitous. Gratuitous profanity doesn't add anything to a book, it doesn't build character, it does nothing other than really shock the reader. But in the case of Catcher in the Rye, I really think if you stripped all the profanity out of the book, it would not be the same book. It wouldn't ring as true, and we wouldn't get as good of a sense of Holden's character as we do. And Tony Robbins has actually talked about this. He constantly curses in his seminars, and he does it for a very specific reason. He says that the brain responds to curse words in a way that it responds to almost no other type of language. And I think Salinger was tapping into that when he chose to use so much profanity in his book. So what I want you to do is take a good hard look at your novel right now and maybe catalog how often do you swear, what swear words do you use, and then ask yourself, how would the book feel differently if I cut these out? Because if you can cut them out, you probably should, right? If there's no reason to keep them in, then yeah, cut them. But if you feel like they give a texture to the book, if they are doing world building, if they are building your character, then there's a reason for them to be in there and you should absolutely keep them in. This next point is kind of a covert operation, and it is number 5, Marquez's sneaky workaround. What do you do in your book if you feel like it's not right to have the actual curse word spoken? Maybe there's been too much cursing already in your book and you're like, I don't want to add more to that. Maybe there's been no cursing, but you're like, I don't feel this is the type of book that cursing would improve because of my audience or for some other reason. If that is you, then follow Gabriel Garcia Marquez's strategy in Love in the Time of Cholera. When there was nothing left to eat on the plates, the captain wiped his lips with a corner of the tablecloth and broke into indecent slang. What's he doing? He's just summarizing the curse rather than saying it in actual dialogue. And I see this technique used pretty often in books aimed at conservative or religious or young audiences. It gets you the realism, like you're saying, like, this is the type of character who would say something like this, but without the offensive profanity. And you don't have to do this everywhere in the book. You could curse in some parts of the book and then other parts just summarize it. This next one is my favorite point out of all 9 of these techniques. It is number 6, Flannery's holy potty mouths. Now, Flannery O'Connor was a Catholic writer. I think there's a case made that she is easily in, say, the top 5 best short story writers of the 20th century. And there's not a ton of cursing in her short stories, but something I did see semi-frequently is that she would have characters use religious curses, like Jesus Christ. And she does this in multiple stories, but especially in things like Parker's Back. But she's Catholic, and I feel like there's a resistance to her using these religious curses. And so what she does is she gives them a double meaning. On one level, her character is just cursing. Like, they think they are uttering a religious curse. But on the other hand, the curse happens at a very pivotal, like, almost religious transformation moment, a conversion moment, and so it sounds like they're calling upon God. So Flannery manages to be both true to the actual character, this is something they would say, and also true to her personal religious convictions. Now, how does this apply to you? Well, I would say look in your book for places where curses can have double meanings. And it might just be something silly, like a character walks into a room and finds his wife with a coworker and they're doing what you would expect on a bed, and drops an F-bomb. Obviously, that's both cursing, and it's also a literal description of what's happening. Now, the next one is a little bit of an exception to everything we've talked about so far. It is number 7, curse words as humor. You know that sometimes curse words are just hilarious. In fact, you might be thinking right now of a place in a movie or a book or something where curse words were used in a funny way rather than in, say, an angry way. Let's look at a book by Jenny Fagan called The Panopticon. I think the reason that is funny is the little girl keeps on asking this woman, oh, did you say this curse word? Did you say this curse word? And then she comes up with quite crazy examples of curse words that end up being more funny than offensive in any way. So listen, I don't care how depressing your book is, how dark it is, there's always room for humor. So look for a place where you can use curse words in a hilarious way. I guarantee that you won't regret it and your reader won't regret it either. This next example is probably our grittiest one out of this entire video. It's number 8, Irving Welch's Class Consciousness. You probably know Irving Welch because he wrote Train Trainspotting, which is about heroin addicts in Scotland. Now, the sheer number of F-bombs and C-words in this book is honestly, it's staggering. There's more than 700 F-bombs and more than 300 C-words in this book. With those kind of numbers, he better have a very good reason for doing what he's doing, but I think he actually does. So I think cursing, and specifically the way that his characters are cursing, is a way for him to give his characters a social class, to let the reader know this is a social class they belong to. They're working class, they're from Edinburgh, and also their excessive language matches their excessive actions. The wild things they will do in order to get their hands on heroin is, I mean, like diving into a public toilet type of bad stuff. I think if you removed the curse words from a book like this, it would be a betrayal of the texture of these characters' real lives. Now, you might be saying to yourself, like, I don't want to do that in my book, like that's not really my style. That's cool. Here's a technique that I want you to consider. Have one character who curses a lot and one character who doesn't curse at all. I think that contrast will give us a sense of their personalities and help the reader to feel like they know these people. Now it's time for our very last point, number 9, the character reversal. I swear that I have seen examples of this in both books and movies, but for the life of me, when researching this video, I couldn't find those examples. So you're gonna have to do me a solid and in the comments, drop any examples you have of this. And you can do this one of two ways. One, you have a character who swears all the time, but in a crazy moment of crisis, they don't swear at all. Or you could have a character who never swears and is the type of person who would never swear, but then in a moment of crisis, what comes out of their mouth is filthy. So even though I don't have a book example, I actually have a personal example for this one. My mother was a saint. Like, never swore at all, never heard anything coming out of her mouth that was even remotely like a curse word. She considered like the word butt to refer to your hindquarters was a filthy word you should never use. But once, when she was disciplining me, she told me to get my ass back to my bedroom. And I was just floored. I was shocked. I'm like, So, you know, when you have a character who that's not in their personality to curse or swear at all, and then you have them do it, it's so powerful for the reader to experience. And I would recommend using that technique. And just a reminder, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to BookFox Academy or buy a copy of that dialogue course. It will help you immensely.